You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
We've got our good friend James S Robbins who's joining us, and every Tuesday he comes in to offer so much thoughtful insight on the things that are going around in and around the world. And, you know, Jim, there's hardly ever enough time to cover it all. And there are a couple of very important things that are going on specifically in this week. I'll bring up three, and then I'll let you take whichever one you'd like to start with. First off, unfortunately, we're seeing the increased violence in Ukraine. I think it's just the precursor of a civil war, unfortunately. And then you have more emails and damaging information coming out on what really happened in Benghazi and things that we've been discussing together for, I guess, probably about 2 years now. And then the last thing I'd like to introduce is the girls who were kidnapped from that school by Boko Haram in Nigeria, and I'm glad to see that this administration is reacting. I think that the world should just go after this group, eradicate them, and get these girls back and bring them back home to their families. So, Jim, whichever one you'd like to lead with, go right ahead.
Well, dude, Benghazi was like 2 years ago. So, you know.
Good point. Let's just forget about that and move on then.
Yeah, Nixon should have said that in 1974, you know, when he came on to resign. He should have said, dude, Watergate was like 2 years ago, and left it at that. He might, you know, he could have served out his term. Wow, yeah, you know, the first two, in any case, really show the diminishment of the United States. One is our inability to try to put a lid on chaotic situations like what's going on in Eastern Europe, and the other, Benghazi, just showing the pathetic lengths to which the administration will go to cover up its weakness and its sort of general sense of drift. Ukraine is really serious if people aren't paying attention to it. I mean, the civil war is already going on because people are dying on both sides of that conflict. Like, we had the immolation of pro-Russian protesters in Odessa. And, you know, however you feel about Ukraine and its sovereignty and independence, that wasn't a good thing for the pro-Ukrainian people to do, to burn all these people alive in a warehouse. It just, I mean, it's a bad thing in and of itself, but why it's really bad is it gives Vladimir Putin the kind of pretext that he will need to invade, to intervene. And I think Russia has already laid the groundwork for that. I mean, no doubt about it. Now we have the Kremlin saying things like, well, you know, the pro-Russian protesters are out of our control. We don't really have influence over them anymore, as if they ever admitted that they did, because we know that they actually are very much behind all this. But by distancing themselves from the pro-Russian protesters, what they're trying to do is set themselves up as the impartial arbiter for when they finally do intervene on what they will no doubt call a humanitarian or peacekeeping mission to separate the warring parties and to, you know, end the bloodshed, that kind of thing. They'll use the same rhetoric that we used when NATO intervened in Libya, you know, to help overthrow Muammar Gaddafi. So just wait for that, because that is coming, and it is probably coming very soon.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. And I also want to point out to our listeners that to now, the talk has been the concern of the Ukrainian cities that border along Russia, referred to as the eastern part of Ukraine. But Odessa is not in the eastern part of Ukraine. It's really more, you know, the south central part of Ukraine, and that's concerning because to me that almost, you know, means that we're potentially looking at a civil war that will engulf the entire country. I don't mean just fighting on the eastern part, but this is going to spread, folks. And, you know, if there's ever a time for, you know, the big boys at the table to call for, you know, really an off-the-record, sitting down behind closed doors and working out something that will prevent this from happening, Because, even if at the end of the day Russia ends up having Ukraine or ends up having a large part of Ukraine and they achieve their goals, they're still not considering the loss of life, and we are not necessarily considering the loss of life, nor the Ukrainians or the pro-Russians in Ukraine. I mean, there's so many people involved here that aren't looking at past occurrences, in Europe and other parts of the world where this happens, and it doesn't really work out for anyone in the end, because all it is a lot of death, a lot of destruction, and then you end up with something that doesn't even come close to resembling what you started with when it first happened. It's very dangerous, Jim.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Russia's goal is not going to be just taking over eastern Ukraine, which I think is a given, but they will drive all the way to Kiev and replace the government in power with the old government that they supported. Russia has never recognized the current government as legitimate. They say it was the result of a coup. They do not recognize the upcoming presidential election for May 25th as legitimate. They say it would be ill-advised. And, if the election comes off, then that undercuts their coup point, because how do you have a coup in an election that is illegitimate? Usually if they say a coup is illegitimate, the coup guys just stay. But if you have a coup and an election, that kind of increases the legitimacy of the government. So they will not allow that election to go forward. And in my opinion, they're going to intervene before then. So sometime in the next couple of weeks, we're going to see Russia do something fairly dramatic to try to short-circuit all this. And bear in mind, too, that the People's Republic of Kharkiv, which is one of the separatist groups, have declared their own referendum coming up on May 11th, which is, the Sunday. So that referendum, no doubt, the results that they will announce, no doubt will say that, they're an independent state or whatever they proclaim themselves as, and that they want to join Russia, just the way the same thing happened in Crimea, at which point Russia will intervene on their behalf. So that's coming up soon.
Yeah, Jim, this is an interesting problem because, first off, the same way an alcoholic may be drawn to vodka, you have puppeteers who are drawn to controlling and holding the strings. And I think, in fact, when you look at major stresses on society throughout history, it's exactly at such times where societies expose, their true selves. I don't know if you had a chance to see it, but there was an interesting article. In the opinion in the New York Times today, and the point they were basically making was Germany is taking a fairly neutral stance here, and I didn't know if you've been tracking this, and I want to get your opinion on this, because if Germany, the powerhouse that they are, who's been kind of the stalwart and anchor for much of the EU, decides to play Switzerland on this event, we might as well just take our bat and ball and go home, since the president has already quit. If Germany quits, is there even a game for us still to play here?
Well, there's hardly a game. I know the administration is doing what it can, or what it thinks it can, to try to forestall all these events, whether it's sanctions on individuals inside Russia or the former Ukrainian leadership, or trying to target Russian banks or other forms of economic warfare. Maybe we have intelligence cooperation going on with the Ukrainians. So there are various ways that we can try to help out. But in the end, it's not going to change Russia's point of view towards Ukraine as being a legitimate part of Russia, which Vladimir Putin fully thinks and has basically said. And it's not going to stop Russia from trying to pursue this course of action. Whether we can dissuade them from military intervention, I don't know. I very seriously doubt it. I think the Russians have done their best to lay out a logic and a framework for intervention, following the same kind of arguments that the U.S. has used for intervening in other countries. The only thing that's missing right now would be a UN resolution saying that it's okay for Russia to go in. But I don't think that will halt them. I think they may ask for that kind of resolution in the UN, and they will couch it in these sort of neutral terms, like somebody has to do something to stop the bloodshed, that kind of thing. But in the end, they'll go in whether they have that or not.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jim. And, obviously, and I agree with you, the timeline's very short, and we're going to see this play out. I also think that Vladimir Putin's played his moves long in advance of even going into the Ukraine or Crimea in the first place. And I want to also add that, if you watch Russian TV or any of the other things, that the propaganda has been going on for some time, and any Russian-speaking people who've been paying attention and get their news from that are definitely, I guess, sympathetic to what Putin is doing here. Jim, if you can, we have a caller, Jonathan, who just had a quick question on Russia and I guess a statement, so I'll have him pop on and then I'll let you respond to him. Go ahead, Jonathan, and welcome to the Final Say radio show with Brett and John Rappaport and our expert, James S. Robbins.
Hello, how are you guys doing?
Doing well. Go ahead and ask Jim your question and state whatever opinion you might have on the issue in Russia and in Ukraine.
I think that Russia completely deserves the Ukraine, especially after the Soviet Union's territory was divvied up between the Allies. I think they are completely deserving of this, and I think there should be no resistance with the Western powers with Russia taking back what land is technically theirs.
Mm-hmm. Under the Constitution of the USSR, the Union republics that made it up, the 15 Union republics, had the right to secede from the USSR. Ukraine in 1990, as the Soviet Union was crumbling, added to that crumble by voting to secede from the USSR. That's the root of Ukrainian sovereignty. So to say that technically it's Russia's, well, that's not true. The Russian Federation is a country that was formed out of something that used to be called the RSFSR, which was part of the Soviet Union, and all of the surrounding countries were one-time Union republics that exercised their right to secede from the Soviet Union. So the legal basis under international law, that's the basis for sovereignty, which was then recognized by the rest of the international community. Also, Ukraine is a member state of the United Nations and probably a member state of a whole bunch of other international organizations. So to say, technically it's Russia, well, that's not true by any means. I mean, that is not at all true in any way.
I would add something else, Jim, because correct me if I'm wrong, but a good amount of Ukraine was actually part of Poland before it was part of Russia, and before then it was part of something else. I mean, so if this guy really, well, if he was a legitimate caller and really wanted to be technical about it, then you have to go back in time. But the bottom line is, and I think this is something that's getting lost in the conversation within the media, and it's a fact that if Russia wants to be a legitimate member of the international community, then they can't go back to these old-style propaganda wars that support their conquest. And, just like here, and by the way, it's not anything that we even do in the United States, as some people talk about our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I don't see how you can make the case in any way that the United States has tried to take over or occupy either of those countries. I mean, it's actually ludicrous, which is the exact opposite of the result that you see starting to unfold in Eastern Europe.
Well, Russia is trying to use the same kind of arguments that the United States has used for its interventions. And I think that even Americans who think that the United States should have a global role can at least discuss the idea that sometimes maybe the stuff that we've done has skirted the law. I mean, some of the things President Obama does, particularly with drones, should give us some pause. However, in this case, it's pretty clear that they're just exploiting the kind of rhetoric that we use, I think, more legitimately to their own ends. I really wish something I think the United States could do is release more information on the Russian control over what's going on inside, first what went on in Crimea and now what's going on in eastern Ukraine, and the way that either Russian soldiers or Russian agents of influence or whoever they are, or, your last caller, are being controlled by Moscow to do the things that they're doing. If we had like solid intelligence on that, because Secretary of State Kerry said we have like phone calls, tapes of phone calls. Well, release them. I mean, Snowden already told the world that the NSA is collecting everything, so I don't think it's going to compromise sources and methods too badly if we could release some stuff. And the Russians, they already know all our tricks because, you know, their guy Snowden took care of that. So put them on trial in the international community. Actually show the link between what's going on and the Kremlin, if that evidence exists. If it doesn't exist, well, then we don't have a case. But if it does exist and we have it, then go ahead and embarrass them.
Yeah, Jim, it's very true, very well said. Before I move on, I just want to make the point to our relatively crass caller. Russia had an enormous systematic slaughter campaign, the equivalent in numbers to the German Holocaust against Jews, and of course that also included many Jews in the Ukraine. And then they gentrified them and moved their own Russian-speaking people in there. So that is the exact opposite of how we would want to lay claim. And while, you know, we're not so naive on this show as to understand this is not how the world worked for many centuries, it's what we're trying to make unique about this century based upon the lessons of last century. Jim, if we can move on.
Sure.
I want to get your opinion on Carney's recent, from his press release, from his press briefing yesterday, where he, no matter how many times he was probed, refused to do anything other than politicization, and threw in a new set of words, which hopefully will become a big part of the election campaign, which is they're only going to respond to, quote unquote, legitimate oversight. So I want to get your opinion on the legitimate oversight commentary, as well as your opinion on Trey Gowdy as a selection to oversee this hearing, this process, and the likelihood that he will have the mettle to dig deep enough to get to the truth, which really was, to me, a massive election fraud beyond perhaps almost anything we've seen since Nixon's Watergate.
Well, I think Trey Gowdy is a good choice, particularly because he fires up the base, and going into this election, that's something that Republicans want to do, particularly when you have some Republicans talking about issues that turn off the base, like immigration reform or amnesty or something like that, which I do not understand politically. But not to digress, but they should just wait until they control the House and the Senate, and then they can write a good bill. Why are they going with Charles Schumer's bill? Charles Schumer, the guy who has already said that he was going to, fix it in the mix, and that when they get to conference, that the liberal Democrats will just shove in all the stuff that they want. I don't get it. But anyway, so I see that behind the choice of setting up this select committee to get people fired up, which is not to say that it doesn't have a legitimate purpose on its own. I think this is a long time coming. It should have been done a while ago. But now that these smoking gun emails have been uncovered, that really show what we all knew was going on, which was White House direct political control of this entire leadership and policy failure that resulted in the deaths of 4 Americans, completely calculated to, as the email says, portray this as an internet video and not the failure of policy, even though we know the whole internet video thing was a total lie. And it'll be great if they really get to the bottom of this and see how high it goes. But I think we all know how high it goes. And I agree with Charles Krauthammer's assessment that this is about the same as the discovery of the Watergate tapes, because before the tapes, the whole Watergate investigation was kind of floundering and going nowhere, and Nixon kind of shrugged it off. But after the tapes, that's when things started to get hot. So I think that they're in hot water now. And as for Carney's latest, verbal jujitsu, I think it's the type of thing that we would expect from the White House to say, well, legitimate oversight. Come on. They're not going to. They didn't even want to give this stuff up. I'm surprised these emails weren't destroyed long ago. What, did somebody forget to hit delete?
Something like that. His interesting jiu-jitsu block, throw and strike move was one. He mentioned he never saw Mike Morrell's testimony. Really, you're the mouthpiece. This is such a major issue, and first off, so of course you can't possibly believe this. He's going to say he never saw the CIA director testimony. Really. The second is the doublespeak where he's trying to say, no, we never had. It's a lie. The Republicans are lying. We did not have a military stand-down order. Yeah, of course you didn't have a military stand-down order. You never told them to put their clothes on in the first place. And then the last thing here is you notice he's trying to move from obfuscation to the normal distraction by saying that they're blaming the Republicans' budget for not having adequate security, not their inability to manage and identify where security leaks actually occurred, Jim. So always interesting to actually read between the lines.
Yeah, it's all pretty pathetic. We have Nancy Pelosi's like, why don't we just talk about something else? And, of course, the classic dude that was like 2 years ago defense. I still think that's just one of the best things I've ever heard come out of the administration. But, they're still blaming George W. Bush for the state of the economy, even though, on average, the Bush economy was a lot better than what we have right now. It was just the last year and a half that things collapsed. But, something where their utter leadership failure and distraction or playing golf or whatever it was led to the deaths of 4 Americans is too far in the past, too distant in the past to even talk about. Who can even remember things that remote?
Well, it's amazing. I mean, every December 7th, we certainly don't think about anything that happened on that date or June 6th or, because it's so far in the past. What's it matter? What's the difference anyway, right, Hillary? Jim, I want to bring up our last quick topic of the day, and let me just preface this by saying I think Condoleezza Rice is one of the most accomplished women of any sort, whether political ideology, color, size, shape, sex, whatever, that this world has seen. I think she's an incredible person, brilliant. I think she's done so much to try to help her country, and I think it's a shame that Rutgers essentially thinks that someone along the way of Snooki is more important to listen to than Condoleezza Rice. Wow, have the liberal universities fallen far?
Well, yeah, but she's of the wrong persuasion, right? She's a somewhat conservative Republican. So obviously race doesn't matter, right? I mean, it's progressive tolerance that if you're right. if you're of a certain race, but you are in service of the wrong ideas, let's put it the way they might put it, then you're no good. Then we reject you, right? It's like calling Clarence Thomas and Uncle Tom. Mm-hmm. But wait, isn't he an African American? Oh, yeah, that doesn't count. He's right because he's a conservative. So of course the liberal academics, and they will justify it right and left, saying, oh no, this is because her ideas are wrong or whatnot. And it's nice that they admit it, but then if you turn around and say, well, okay, I don't like Barack Obama's policies, I don't like his ideas. Oh, it's because you're a racist.
Exactly. But here's the problem, because as I've watched all the different liberal talking pieces on the networks for the last week discussing this particular issue, they keep saying, well, they're upset about the wars that she started. And I'm like, well, excuse me, are you trying to tell me that it was wrong for the United States when attacked on 9/11 to respond? Should we not have responded? I mean, because I'm not sure how you could make the argument that not having a good plan in Afghanistan, or being there too long, or holding the backs of our tying the arms of our soldiers behind their backs while we were there, or having incoherent policy, that's a different story. But having gone to Afghanistan and taking out those who attacked the United States is wrong. I mean, I don't know where the liberals are coming from these days. And then the students are clearly, I don't know what they're being taught in the classroom or by these professors who took part in this exercise, by the way, at Rutgers.
Yeah, I think you do know what they're being taught. Yeah, well, it just goes to show where we are today, that they say, well, we object to the wars that she fought. Well, she was part of an administration that made the calls of wars that, the Iraq War, it wasn't as good as it should have been, but in the end we could say that we won it. Afghanistan, as you point out, even President Obama said that was a war of necessity. We responded to aggression from Afghanistan or from those that they were harboring of al-Qaeda. So I don't see how you can object to that war now. It hasn't turned out so well lately, but that's hardly her fault because she hasn't been there for a while. And it also shows how pathetic universities have become with respect to academic freedom. God forbid they have somebody in there who's going to say something controversial that disagrees with their, professors who are in lockstep agreement on every single liberal ideological position. Universities are the last place to go anymore for any kind of free thinking, free discussion, playing with ideas or anything like that. They've just become indoctrination factories. And speaking as a 15-year academic and having taught at a few places that are, extremely left-wing, God knows how I even got there. I can tell you, it is so typical that they would say that she can't come. I don't know why any conservative or, even a person moderately conservative like Condoleezza Rice would even think that they could go and talk to a place like that and be given a measure of respect.
That's a good point, but I'd also say this. I highly doubt that she would have said anything that would have been offensive to these students in the first place because she's just too honorable of a person and would have discussed issues that would have had a positive impact on these students' future, which is what graduation is all about. Jim, we have about a minute left before I've got to let you go, and we're going to sign off today. But I know you've got a book coming out soon, and I'll give you a chance to discuss that real quick. And do you have a release date yet? Or?
Oh, yeah, June 23rd. It's The Real Custer, From Boy General to Tragic Hero. All about George Custer. It's been getting some good reviews. We had a pretty good nod in Publishers Weekly. True West likes it. Civil War News likes it. It's available for pre-order on Amazon, and it's just a rip-roaring adventure, so check it out.
Excellent. And Jim, thank you so much, as always, for joining us every Tuesday. We'll see you again next week, and have yourself a great rest of the week.
Okay, you guys do. Thanks.
All right.